Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and on this episode of King of the Hill, I want to talk about KOTH of the Vampires. I have extensive experience with this faction, as I constantly use them to handicap myself when teaching new players. No experienced player should ever teach the game to new players with a good combo, and the vampires are just so convenient in that regard. Competitively, the vampires are like the Loki of the Smash Up universe. Every time I try to give them another chance, they betray me, and I should have seen it coming. It's hard to talk about why a faction doesn't work, but for me, it starts with the Count, as he is the king minion. The Count is also completely dependent on other cards for its ability to trigger. Although fixing the Count won't solve all the vampire problems, it is a step in the right direction. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the subset of the community who likes vampires. One of the beautiful aspects of Smash Up is that there is no clear consensus on what is best or worst. It's always about the pairing, and to isolate a single faction can be difficult. However, when I polled the Smash posting community, vampires were far and away voted as the worst faction, and there is always an element of wisdom in the crowds. It is also clear that they received a very good Titan, and while Innsmouth received a better one, I've competed and won with Innsmouth far more than I do with vampires because I think they have a simpler playbook. The lack of a vampire playbook begins with the Count's unfortunate wording. The Count has the ongoing ability, after another player's minion is destroyed, place a +1 counter on this minion. This has the potential to be quite powerful, as there are a lot of destruction cards in the game, and quite a few mass destruction cards. The only problem is, the vampires don't have them. The faction that stands to gain the most from destruction has possibly the worst destruction of any faction who has that as a theme or sub-theme. Looking at the vampire cards alone, they can destroy 5 minions of opposing players, with Big Gulp being the most flexible. All others require specific base placement and can target only power 2 minions. While the Night Stalker is a strictly better form of Laser Tops, it's not enough to justify the Count's ability. With the perfect cards, the vampire-only Count will cap out at 10 power, but it will take several turns, and it isn't every turn. In the meantime, Air Doctor can reach and exceed the same power level on a more consistent basis. For a minion that is designed to stay out in play, the Count is surprisingly vulnerable. Beam Up is its worst nightmare, although destruction is an option as well. Today, the Count's entire ability can be abused by the Dragon Warrior, as he can steal all the Count's power counters. Even with Opportunist, which would double the power growth, the Count is simply too slow. I suspect that this is one of the king minions that is used for its printed power more than most, as it's easier to just drop 5 power and break the base. The Count relies heavily on its partner faction, but that's not my biggest problem with its ability. In my opinion, the Count should gain power whenever any minion is destroyed, even your own. It's shocking to me that it does not. Hammerhead gets the bonus, which was perhaps a course correction, but that is a localized ability. As the king minion, which should be strictly better than Hammerhead, I think it's perfectly reasonable that the Count feeds on its own minions. Because it does not, the vampires have an issue with their cards working together. It's surprisingly difficult for me to gain the benefit from Fledging Vampire because opponents can anticipate and block it unless you ignore your minion play or play elsewhere. But the vampires have no good setup minions. If you are fortunate enough to make your Fledging Vampire a 3, this disincentivizes you to destroy it with your Heavy Drinker. Since most minions are at least 2 power, you are downgrading in total power to use its ability, unless there are benefits for destruction. These are pretty rare, and while I liked Vampire Tricksters in the beginning, I'm not sure that destroying the gremlins is worth it, as you are still losing power. It doesn't help the vampires that the destruction must occur for the benefit to occur, unlike cards like Sacrifice. One of the only ways to justify the self-destruction is to increase the reward, and giving the Count a power counter was the easy answer. There was one time an opponent destroyed a War Raptor on a different base to gain +1 power, which was clever, but there are any number of other abilities that could have done the trick without sacrificing the minion. Granted, that player acquired Heavy Drinker via trade, so he wasn't even playing vampires, but the point still stands. There are so many other abilities that produce the same if not better results. If you are not destroying your fledgling vampire, and the vampires are the weakest faction, that means that your partner minions are too good to destroy for a simple +1 counter. But if the count grew regardless of who was destroyed, then I might be inclined to start blowing up my own minions. It would create new synergies with killer plants, superheroes, and minions of Cthulhu. I would completely buy into the seppuku strategy of the samurai for their benefits as well. That's 4 faction synergies created in an instant, and I struggle to think of 4 factions I would recommend with vampires in a competitive setting. And I'm talking about pairings where both the factions benefit from the presence of each other, as opposed to the partner faction doing the heavy lifting. Imagine eating your own minion to launch a Mako and get the count bonus. Suddenly, self-destruction would be a lot more appealing. As of now, the count does not benefit from monster destruction, except in the rare cases where they are controlled by a player. But if it did, the warriors would become a great partner as well. Unfortunately, the count does not have this ability, so we have to make do with what we have. As the vampires lack the destruction needed to utilize the count, we have to look elsewhere. There are 2 approaches, either increasing the frequency of the destruction or making it easier for the vampire actions to be effective, since they're limited in power. Glimmer is extremely effective in depowering minions for your Night Stalkers, but sharks do the same thing as vampires, and fairy sharks are amazing, so why play fairy vampires? The only faction I actually like playing with vampires is the Kung Fu Fighters. Everybody with Kung Fu fighting can give the count unexpected amounts of power, and Lady Whirlwind and Dragon Warrior can combine to have renewable destruction. I'm not sure the magical girls are much of a fit, but they do have talent-based depowering and destruction, and are strong enough to overcome a vampire handicap. As written, the count is lacking in its ability. It does get stronger the more players you have, as more players beating up on each other will make the count stronger for little effort, but dropping a single phrase could have made it much simpler. It would give me reason for playing vampires other than handicapping myself. Unfortunately, retconning cards is not something Smash Up does, which is why the Ancient Lord was created instead. I still don't trust the vampires though, and perhaps I never will. What do you think of the count? Would you change its ability like I described? Let me know in the comments. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.